And so through that again, you did lots of different roles. I saw there you were head of SAP for finance. I also saw fairly early on there you were leading a team of about 25 people. Was that your first step into a leadership type role? Yeah. I think the last is. So what challenges did you face in that?
I like the smile that you see.
Yeah.
What challenges did you face? So this one was actually such a great team. So when OI acquired the organization I was part of, it was part of a much bigger acquisition, and the company went into what are we as a group, how do we reorganize our process, and particularly across Europe, which was almost half of the business. So we went into this really massive operating model rethinking, and then implementation and process, and so I was part of that team. I was part of that team because I had good process experience, good SAP experience, and I could speak English.
Yeah.
So that was a winning ticket for me. And I was never afraid to challenge what I was hearing, and I think that's why we would get on so well with Jed as well. Is I would always call out something that I would see, so that it would bring a different perspective. So it was a pretty big deal, this team, because I was already looking after SAP Finance for Europe, and that was in a maintenance kind of mode, and it's a smaller team. But this was really the design of all the processes and systems that would be supporting a new operating model across 12 different countries, etc. So that was a pretty big deal for me. And it was tapping into my strengths, and my team was really amazing. But the couple of challenges I had were probably, first of all, it took me a while to understand how my role has shifted from a doer to a leader. And I remember an evening where I was with the team really late, and actually the CIO pulled me in his office and said, what are you doing? I said, we're finishing this thing, we're testing tomorrow, I'm staying with the team, I'm not letting them down. I was feeling a bit like a hero.
Yeah.
And he said, your job is not to get exhausted with them. Your job is to figure out what a way for them not to be exhausted, including, finding the budget, rescaling the team. But your job is not to be exhausted with them. And I moved from being a hero to feeling like I had totally failed them.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a aha moment for me, this one.
Is that, do you think, the distinction between management and leadership?
Wow, you're opening such another bigger conversation here. I don't know. I think even if you're seeing yourself as a manager and not as a leader, I think the difference of a leader is more how do you inspire and create the condition for success. As a manager, is how do you make sure that you have the right process and the framework for this to run. It's not how it's going to look like tomorrow, but at least today it runs. I think that was just me being a doer in the doer, not even the manager of the team.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I think I saw in that role, and I think if you just touched on there you were managing people across 4 continents as well.
Yes.
Yes. So how did you manage working such a diverse range of backgrounds and cultures?
Yeah, because we had we had people in Europe, North America, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. Listen, like in all fairness, the organization was working like that. I was not the only one at all. It's not something I set up. So we already had quite a good series of process. We didn't have the right communication channel at the time. Skype wasn't such a big thing at the beginning, so it was mostly phone conversation and emails, and that's a lot gets lost in translation for that. So I was making sure I did a lot of travel at that time. I was making sure that I knew the team well enough so that when I'd get written communication, I understood where they were coming from. I made sure that the team had points of connection regular enough. But for me, it was a lot of getting to know them and getting to spend enough time in geography so that we could build that up. We didn't have the luxury of having, Teams and Zooms, and so that required quite a bit of travel, quite a bit of individual understanding. And making sure as well that I had the right talent, because you cannot do the same amount of monitoring. You have to have a level of delegation between the time difference and the plane difference. So making sure as well that you had the right leaders in those different areas.
Coming from let's call it a Western European upbringing, what did you have to relearn to be successful in that role?
I think the diversity was a little bit of a challenge for me. Um, and it's a challenge that I faced a little bit later down my career again.
Yeah.
I could see very quickly the richness that this was bringing to the conversation. So we had different type profile, different working style. Some of them were individual, but some of them were the country where you were coming from. And the way you work in Italy and the way you work in Poland is vastly different.
Yep.
The way you work in Germany and the way you work in French is vastly different. So between China and the US, very vastly different. I could see very quickly the beauty of having those different things around the table and how this was helping me with some blind spots. What I did find much harder was how do you manage a respectful and psychologically safe environment to bring those different voices to the table, especially in cultures, and China was a key challenge for me a bit later down the road of making sure that you create the space for the feedback. When if you have a Chinese team or an American team around the table, one team will provide feedback in a way which will be really, really open and as an exploration, and it's not necessarily always thought through. It's going to be, let's put things on the table. In the China or Japanese team as well, it was very hard to get. They would listen to what the leader was saying and trying to understand what were the expectations of the conversation without this free-flowing brainstorming. And there is not one way that is better than the other. The challenge is how do you get this to work collectively really well. So on this one, there was a lot of work on some of the teams on setting the expectation and showcasing what it could look like in a safe way. And there was a lot of general coaching and making sure that we had really good ground rules of interaction. So we were super clear. So for instance, we would do this, the black hat, the challenger hat, we would really have this. We would call that out and say, okay, I'm going to ask you, Jian, to be the challenger on this one. So being very explicit on giving the permission to step into a different role.
Yeah. Look, I think that's right. I think in any global role, it's such a mindful aspect that can easily get overlooked and not thought through, and that's quickly going to become a blocker.
Yes.
And I think how you get different cultures to collaborate, as you say, come to the table for different conversations means different things. But ultimately, the innovation comes from that diversity, somewhere from the different thinking or the different way of looking at problems as well.
Yes. Yes.
I saw after a period of time there, so you then relocated to Melbourne.